I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Okay, not perfect men, but at least disciplined ones, men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. Look, let me start off with an observation. Most Christian men, they don't actually relate to God as their father. And, I kind of had the title for this video as Sons, Not Slaves, but it's almost like Pharisees versus Sons of God. We've all seen that scene, Chosen. Men just don't relate to God like father. They relate to him as like a supervisor, obeying rules all the time, always watching, always evaluating, always, one mistake away from disappointment. And because of that, their faith is driven less by love and more by anxiety. They obey but nervously, they pray but cautiously. They live, but they live small. That posture doesn't produce maturity, it produces compliance. And there's a word for that: slavery. The difference between a son and a slave. Now, before anyone reacts, let's go ahead and define the terms carefully. A slave obeys because he is afraid of punishment. A son obeys because he understands the mission at hand. A slave avoids risk. A son is trained to take responsibility. A slave asks, "Am I allowed to do this?" A son will ask, "What needs to be done?" That difference specifically changes everything. Okay, and scripture is explicit about which one you are meant to be. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back in fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, Romans 8:15. That's where, we see this big difference between, fear versus adoption, okay? Because those are opposing foundations. And that's a story that most men, quite frankly, they don't really recognize. So let me go ahead and put this in everyday terms. Think about it like a household with a strict, unpredictable father, one where the rules change just constantly. Approval is rare, punishment feels like arbitrary, it's like always different. The children in that house, they don't really grow up to be confident, right? They grow to be careful. They learn how to read moods, how to stay invisible, how to avoid doing anything that might draw attention that they don't want. They may obey, but they never really mature. So go ahead and contrast that with a good father. One who corrects, yes, but also teaches, who disciplines, but explains why the discipline is happening, who expects growth, wants you to succeed, not really paralyze yourself, right? That father, he doesn't really want silent children. He wants capable sons. And, this fear-based faith, it really just produces like childlike men, there's this, you know, I guess you could say it connects directly to modern Christianity, as uncomfortable as that probably sounds. A fear-based faith like that keeps many men spiritually young when you think about it. You're always seeking permission, you're always, second guessing yourself, always, I guess, outsourcing judgment to authority figures, pastors, podcasts, systems. Let me be clear here, okay? Guidance does matter, but constant dependency is not humility, it's immaturity. Again, Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up my childish ways, 1 Corinthians 13. At some point, a man is expected to think for himself. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a question that many men are afraid to ask. Even afraid to think sometimes. Can I trust myself to discern God's will? And the unspoken answer that they've absorbed is, no, you're too flawed, too biased, too dangerous. Instead of training discernment, they actually end up suppressing it. Instead of maturing, they kind of just submit endlessly. And that's not how sons are raised. Jesus did not train slaves. Now let's look at Christ, okay? Jesus did not gather men and keep them dependent, right? He taught them, he tested them, he sent them out to act. And yes, he did correct them along the way, often sharply, but notice this, okay? He trusted them with real responsibility before they were perfect. Peter denies him, Thomas doubts. All of them scatter when he dies on the cross, and yet Christ still entrusts them with the mission. That is what a son looks like, not a slave. And there is a personal pattern many men live in, and I've seen this repeatedly. A man wants to improve his life, he wants discipline, he wants order, he wants strength, but before acting, he waits. Maybe he waits for a sign, maybe it's for approval, maybe it's for certainty. And because that certainty never comes, he never moves. He mistakes this hesitation that he has for humility. And here's a point that I want to drive home, okay? Humility does not mean paralysis. It means obedience with responsibility. Slaves, they seek safety, okay? Sons, they seek alignment, and that is the core difference I want to make here. A slave asks, what's the safest option? A son asks, what is the right one? Two different questions, totally, right? Safety is about self-preservation. Alignment is about faithfulness. Even if that alignment feels a little risky. Starting the business, ending the habit, leaving the comfortable job, speaking the truth. Sons understand that responsibility often does involve exposure. Slaves just avoid that. And honestly, I'm probably, inviting some bad things here, but I think a lot of churches actually, and I would say accidentally, I don't think it's necessarily on purpose, but they accidentally train slaves. Let's be honest here. Many churches are structured to manage people, not to mature them. Clear rules, predictable behavior, minimal disruption, that works for institutions. It does not work for forming men capable of stewardship, because stewardship requires initiative, and initiative always involves uncertainty. So it gets discouraged. Then you have the elder brother problem, okay? Jesus actually addresses this directly in the parable of the prodigal son. Everyone focuses on the rebellious younger brother, right? But it's the oldest brother that actually gets the warning here, because he obeys, he stays, he follows the rules, and yet he resents his father. Why? Because he sees himself as a servant, not as a son. Look, these many years I've served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Luke 15:29. That is slave language. I served. I obeyed. I earned. Sons don't keep score like that. And here's actually why sons can and do and are able to handle correction. This is a key difference, okay? Slaves, they fear it. They fear connection in their, or correction, in their soul, because it threatens their security. Sons accept correction because it does develop them. It develops that connection ultimately with the Father, right? For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, Hebrews 12:6. Discipline is not rejection, okay? It is an investment. A father disciplines the child he plans to entrust with responsibility. So, here's what sonship really does require of men, and this is where the tone does need to stay sober, okay? Sonship is not entitlement. It's not casualness. It's weight, okay? Sons are expected to grow, to carry responsibility, to represent the family well, which means, kind of going off of our last video, that means discipline. That means accountability. That means correction without collapse. And I want you guys to go ahead and start thinking about internally shifting in some ways. And this is the shift that I personally think men must make. We need to go from, I hope I don't mess this up, to, look, I will take responsibility and be corrected if necessary. From, need permission to do this, I need wisdom to act rightly. That shift right there, that is the difference between fear and maturity. Steward kings are sons first. A steward king is not autonomous, okay? He is accountable, but he's not paralyzed. He understands that God entrusted him with ground rule, and God expects growth, not perfection. Ultimately, right, we want to get to heaven and we want to hear these words, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Matthew 25:21. Faithfulness precedes expansion. This is why this matters practically, okay? If you see yourself as a slave, you're going to avoid risk, you're going to wait endlessly, you're going to live cautiously. If you see yourself as a son, you will train, you will act, and you will accept correction and keep moving forward. Only one of those produces men capable of stewardship, okay? So look, as I bring this to a close, God did not adopt you so you could live in fear. He adopted you so that you could grow, to learn discernment, shoulder responsibility, to act faithfully without needing constant reassurance. Slaves stay small because fear keeps them obedient. Sons grow strong because love makes them responsible. This is king, not pawn. Live as a son and steward what you've been given.